Support for this program is provided by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting.
Hello and welcome to Louisiana Public Square. I'm Beth, Courtney, President of Louisiana Public Broadcasting.
And I'm Robert Travis Scott, President of the Public Affairs Research Council of Louisiana. In 2002, a state representative from Lake Charles pushed through legislation that eliminated the state sales tax on food and utilities while making up lost revenue through increased income tax rates on high-wage earners. The so-called Stelly Plan was approved by the state's voters. But after 6 years, under both Governors Blanco and Jindal, lawmakers had repealed all but the plan's sales tax exemptions.
Well, this legislative session, Governor Jindal is proposing a tax swap of a different kind. The state's income tax on corporations and individuals would be eliminated. The difference in revenue would be replaced through a broadening and increase of the state's sales tax. So what could these changes mean for Louisiana's families, businesses, and municipalities? Tonight we explore these issues and more on Tax Reform 2013. But first, some basics. If Governor Jindal's legislative agenda passes, come January of next year, state income tax returns will become a thing of the past, while state sales taxes will expand and increase.
Basically, what the governor is proposing is a tax swap.
Barry Irwin heads the Council for a Better Louisiana.
We would get rid of all of our corporate and personal income taxes and replace that revenue with an expansion in a variety of ways of consumption taxes.
The governor's plan would replace the $3.6 billion in lost revenue from corporate and individual income taxes by increasing the state's sales tax from 4 to 5.88%, broadening the tax to cover 37 new categories of services, and reforming and eliminating over 200 tax exemptions, including the movie tax credit and some oil and gas deductions. The cigarette tax would jump from 34 cents to $1.41 per pack. Low-wage earners and state retirees who currently don't pay income taxes on their retirement income would receive rebates to offset the increase in sales taxes.
I think the governor's rationale is to try and make Louisiana more competitive versus other states, particularly in the area of economic development.
Joseph Hinchman is a policy analyst with the Tax Foundation, a tax research group that the Jindal administration consulted when developing its reform plan. The foundation ranks Louisiana the fourth lowest in the nation for its tax burden, but 32nd highest for its state business tax climate. Louisiana is penalized for its current tax structure complexities and number of exemptions.
As we're coming out of the economic downturn, investment and job creation and entrepreneurs, they can go anywhere in the world, in our global world. The question Louisiana has to ask is, why Louisiana? What makes Louisiana attractive to these people?
There's an overwhelming amount of not only empirical studies, but just evidence from federal data that shows that businesses take things into consideration besides taxes, and those other things tend to outweigh taxes.
David Gray works with the Louisiana Budget Project, a government watchdog group. He says companies are more attracted to a skilled workforce and a solid infrastructure rather than the state's sales and income tax rates. He is also concerned that relying just on sales tax for state revenue is risky.
Most states that don't have an income tax have high property taxes. That's one of the ways that states like Texas and Florida are able to generate enough revenue to weather recessions. They don't rely solely on sales taxes. They rely on two legs, sales taxes and property taxes.
Louisiana's property taxes are ranked the lowest in the country as a percentage of median income. Scott Dranker, an economist with the Tax Foundation, disputes Gray's concern.
The argument that you need many different types of taxes to fund government doesn't really bear itself out either in the economic literature or in the experience that we can look at from other states. For example, South Dakota doesn't have an income tax or a corporate income tax, and they have some of the most stable revenue of any state.
When it comes to sales taxes, LSU economist Jim Richardson says they serve a dual purpose in Louisiana.
The sales tax in Louisiana and this is not true in every state, but in Louisiana, the sales tax is a major source of state revenue and a major source of local revenue.
While Louisiana's sales tax of 4% is relatively low compared to most states, the average local sales tax rate is 4.87%, the highest in the nation. So combined, Louisiana has the third highest state and local sales tax in the country. Increasing the state sales tax from 4% to 5.88% would make Louisiana's combined rate the nation's highest.
Well, that 1.88% will make a tremendous difference in the collection of the sales taxes in the local communities. And for my community in particular, it will be difficult for us to pass an additional sales tax or possibly renew the current taxes that we have.
Hilda Curry is the mayor of New Iberia and president of the Louisiana Municipal Association. She says that local communities are already struggling with unfunded mandates, increases in pension plans, and insurance.
We want to see the state continue to progress, and we want to see economic development, but we have to be certain that it won't be a burden to our communities, to our local communities.
The governor's plan would also broaden sales taxes to cover services in 37 categories that currently aren't taxed.
Many of the services that we have learned will be taxed are services that are integral to the operations of the average small business. Employment services, advertising, it's not just the landscaping and the janitorial services.
John Overton is the owner of Turnkey Solutions and a member of the state's Small Business Advisory Council. While he supports the governor's plan to eliminate inventory and franchise taxes and simplify tax administration, he feels any new sales taxes will be a hard sell to smaller businesses.
We have many small business clients, and I know some have very tight margins already, so much so that at the end of the year, they're not paying income tax already. So for them, it's a little tougher value proposition to say, well, you won't have to pay income tax. Because you're going to have this big benefit. On the other hand, you will have to, there'll be some additional burden on the sales tax.
Henchman with the Tax Foundation sees sales tax expansions as inevitable.
2/3 of the economy is based on services. Our sales taxes haven't kept up, and because of that, the sales tax base has eroded over time, and states have had to raise the rate, ratchet it up a little bit year over year. Ultimately, if the sales tax is going to remain a viable revenue source for the future, states are going to have to start taxing services.
No matter how the plan is ultimately received in the legislature, Irwin applauds the administration for opening up a much-needed discussion.
The bottom line, I think, on this is really pretty much that we have an opportunity to make Louisiana more competitive with its tax structure in ways that I believe can be done without, disadvantaging any particular group of taxpayers.
Well, joining us in our studio to discuss tax reform are residents from the greater Baton Rouge area. We're also joined by members of Southern University, the Junior League, 100 Black Men, and the Legislative Youth Advisory Council. Well, welcome to everyone. LSU's Public Policy Research Lab surveyed over 150 citizens on tonight's topic. Among the survey responses, when asked their opinion of Louisiana's income taxes, 44% of respondents said they are too high and need to be reduced. 40% said they are just about right. 10% say they are too low and need to be increased. And 6% were unsure or didn't answer. As far as Louisiana's state sales taxes are concerned, 56% of those surveyed say they are too high and need to be reduced. 39% consider them just about right, while 3% find them too low and need to be increased. 2% were unsure. Despite Louisiana being ranked as having the lowest property tax per capita in the country, 45% of respondents say they are too high and need to be reduced. 38% think they are just about right. 10% say they are too low and need to be increased, and 7% were unsure or didn't answer. And when asked their opinion on the plan to eliminate the state's personal and corporate income tax and raise the state sales tax, 55% of those surveyed think it is a bad idea. 24% haven't given it enough thought. 17% think it is a good idea, and 4% were unsure or refused to answer. Well, let's start from that point. And what we'd like to talk about maybe first is what's really fair. Are taxes in Louisiana fair? Do you think that they're fair to you and fair to others? Lori, tell us what you think.
Well, I think, taxes, of course, help to keep the revenue up in the state. And so we have to, if we look at it from that angle, we have to say, okay, we have to give it a fair shot. But if we look at it, personally, then we feel like we definitely are affected. And so we also have to take the citizens, the way we feel about it, into consideration.
Yeah. Does anybody think that taxes are not quite fair the way they are now, or fair to you? How about you, Ralph?
No, I think, again, Louisiana is relatively low tax state. And so, I'm a CPA, so I do a lot of people's taxes, and I hear every time I deliver a tax return that people aren't happy about how much they have to pay. But I think probably most of my clients would agree that at the end of the day, we probably are not a very highly taxed state. And
how about you, Mary Patricia? You want to jump in?
Yeah, I think most taxpayers want to know what they're getting when they put their tax dollars into the general budget of our state. And I think that, when you decide what's too high or what's too low, you might also be thinking about what kind of bang you're getting for your buck. Right now, we're seeing drastic cuts to lots of services that people like and people think work just fine, so that might be impacting people's answers on the survey as well.
And Mary Patricia, that brings us to a really important way of looking at this, which is what is the purpose of taxes? What should the purpose of taxes be? What should they be paying for? Cassie, what do you think the purpose of taxes should be?
I think that there are a number of purposes. Obviously, the state has responsibility to the citizens to provide basic services, and so I think that as Ralph said, I think that our taxes here in the state are relatively low. I think that the problem that people have with the taxes here are that they're very complicated, and so in order to keep your tax bill low, you have to, there's a lot of education that you have to do, and for a lot of people, there's a lot of money expended to professionals to figure out how to get that tax bill low. I think that's the problem that most people have with the system, and not necessarily that our taxes are too high.
And I see a nodding head with Faith. You seem to agree with me.
I definitely agree. I mean, I guess my perspective is from a business one. I want business taxes, and I want business to locate in Louisiana, and I want those taxes to be understood by those companies that want to come to Louisiana. I actually live right outside of Shreveport, so for us, we're always competing with Texas. I would like to see it to be a much easier to understand, less exemptions, just a much fairer and simpler tax, so that when people are looking at Louisiana to do business, it's easy for them to see exactly what their tax bill is going to be, whether it's business or individual income taxes.
And that's been so much a part of the discussion that we're seeing on this tax reform. On the one hand, the need to fund government services that are necessary to provide, but also the question about economic development. Will a certain tax structure be more appealing to existing businesses and businesses coming in? Wayne, you had wanted to comment on what Faith was
just
saying.
About the taxes being too complex. I think that's more on the federal level that people are, when you look at where you're going to locate this, Louisiana state income tax for individuals is 2%, 4%, and 6%. You don't get, to minimize your tax bill, you can buy movie credits, you can do stuff like that, but that's only for people that make a certain amount of money or more. For the average individual, 2%, 4%, 6% isn't that much.
In other words, when you get your form, you look it up on the tax table and you're done, right? Is that
yeah?
Okay, Adele.
I think I want to go back to a previous question and sort of reframe the conversation, because much of taxes is really about the role of government. And to the degree that we can agree that the role of government and taxes is to make certain that people are safe, to make certain that there's certain roles of an education and how we increase the wherewithal of everybody to participate in an economy, and that these things are very critical to our economy, then to our well-being, then we appreciate what taxes are for. And I think if you segment the taxes and start thinking about those taxes that on the local level, we tend to vote for those based on our need. We even have the opportunity to vote for them within our own geographies as far as our neighborhoods. So I think that the big debate that's killing us most time is the divide between what's the role of government and who should pay for it. And so when we look at that and when we start looking at this whole, we've got to begin to deal with that question.
Right. And Leslie,
I just thought of this, but I think that another issue is that I'm not really sure that all citizens really understand where tax money is spent. Right. Like we're talking about its use for services and government support. We know that. But does everybody really understand where is that money going?
Where is the government money going, and is it being spent responsibly? We get to that question. Well, wherever it's coming from, we're talking about restructuring how we're going to collect it. And the conversation on the table is getting rid of income taxes, especially getting rid of personal income taxes. That would probably most directly affect all of you. But also corresponding with that to raise sales taxes and to also broaden the base of sales taxes to services. And Andy, what do you make of that tax swap, as we're calling it?
The simplification of it, I think, will be attractive to businesses. The higher tax rates, I think businesses are more averse to uncertainty. Simplify things, they'll know what they're up against. Also, the businesses come and have people at the helm. They're looking at the personal income tax side. I think it may be a good combination. A certainty, they know what their costs are going to be, plus the executives who make decisions are looking at a pretty good deal on the personal income tax side. The high sales tax, being the highest in the nation, balance that with the lowest property taxes, it may even out.
Vanita?
Yes, regarding the question that he said about businesses wanting to come to Louisiana because of tax rate, I don't think that's exactly right, because they're looking also for quality of life. Under that, education, healthcare is very important. In fact, I know some friends of mine couldn't get people to come from, I guess, New York, Connecticut.
If we could just get them down here and learn to fish and to hunt, that gets them. That, when you talk to employers, they always say, once I get them down here, I can keep them here because they love the life here. Lauren?
Yeah, I would just say, I think we have to be careful not to talk about this in the abstract. We could start with the premise, why are we here? Why are we even talking about taxes? From what I've read, we're partially here in some ways to move up the rankings in certain surveys. But in some of the surveys that matter, like Site Selection Magazine, we're already in the top 5 or 6. And so we can't be focused on gaming surveys, particularly surveys that may or may not matter from the standpoint of business. We're already in the top 5. And so I think it's important to understand, why are we here and what's the sort of political motive?
In other words, you're saying that we already have a good economic development climate with the numbers we have, but does anybody disagree with that and think we need to do better with our tax structure? John, what do you think?
I don't disagree with Lauren. I think those are very valid points, and as well was the point was, what is the role of government? One of the things from the eyes of a small business owner is the role of government is not to create jobs. The role of government is to facilitate or get out of the way of small businesses, because, as one of the surveys came out recently, 91% of net job growth in our region in the last 2 decades come from small businesses. And so it is very wise of the administration to look at tax reform through the eyes of a small business owner, because that's our goal, is to create more jobs.
How does it look to you right now with this tax reform they're looking at?
There's some things that not just from me, a small business owner of Turnkey Solutions, but from my clients and the other small businesses I talk to, that we like the idea of some parts of it. The inventory tax, get rid of the franchise tax.
And I'm glad you got your plug-in for your company. We'll get your website up there. Ryan?
Yeah, when we talk about a tax system, I think that there are some guiding principles that we should think of, and that is, we should have a system that's low rates, that's fair, relatively flat with a broad base, easy to comply with, and if you have an issue with that tax system, a way to dispute it and have a clear dispute process. So with the governor's proposal, I think there are some things in there that regarding this centralized sales tax collection, I think that makes a lot of sense. And we really need to explore it and make sure that centralized sales tax collection is in there.
Great.
Same thing with the courts.
Well, Eleanor, you've been watching all this swirling around you with everybody talking. What do you think of all this? What do you make of it?
I agree with Ryan. I would prefer the sales tax because I think it will simplify the system a lot and be more fair to the people of Louisiana.
Well, that's succinctly said. Thank you very much. Well, that's all the time we have for this portion of our show. And when we return, we'll be joined by a panel of experts to further explore Louisiana's tax reform. Welcome back to Louisiana Public Square. Tonight we're discussing Governor Jindal's tax reform proposal for the upcoming session. Joining us now is our panel of experts. Tim Barfield has been the General Counsel for the Louisiana Department of Revenue since October. Prior to his current position, he served as Chief Development Officer for Amedisys. He has served previously in the Jindal administration as Executive Counsel and head of the Louisiana Workforce Commission. State Representative John Bel Edwards is a Democrat from Amite who has been serving his district since 2007. He is the current Democratic Caucus Chairman. Representative Edwards is also a practicing attorney and West Point Military Academy graduate. Kimberly Lewis Robinson is a partner in the Jones Walker Law Firm's Tax and Estates Practice Group. Before joining Jones Walker, Ms. Robinson served as special counsel to Governor Kathleen Blanco and liaison to the Departments of Revenue and Economic Development. Rob Guidry is president and CEO of the Greater Lafayette Chamber of Commerce. He also sits on the Louisiana Chamber of Commerce Executive's Board of Directors, and Mr. Guidry is the Executive Director of Leadership Lafayette and a founder of Leadership Louisiana. Well, before we go to our audience for questions, I'd like to give each of the panelists a chance for an overarching view of how you look at this tremendous reform plan that we're looking at. And what are the most salient, important things that you think our audience really needs to understand about these changes? We're going to start with, of course, Mr. Barfield.
Well, certainly we see this as a great opportunity to continue the momentum that Louisiana has from a standpoint of attracting business, improving the environment for business here in Louisiana, not only for the big projects and attracting people to move here, but for businesses of all sizes and entrepreneurs and people who start their business. So the big factor here is to make Louisiana attractive, to create an economic development environment that's very positive, to create more jobs, and overall to make Louisiana more competitive across the country.
That's great. And Representative Edwards.
Well, I don't consider it to be a reform because reform connotes improvement. I would tell you we already have the fourth lowest state and local tax burden in the nation, lower than Texas and Arkansas and Mississippi. And this is not a tax cut. This is a reallocation of the tax burden if it's in fact going to be revenue neutral. But it does so in an overly regressive way. We would have the most regressive tax structure in the nation. And so I'm not sure that it's good to be the number 50 state on any tax criteria.
Well, two contrasting points of view. We'll hear more from the two of you, but Kimberly, how do you fall in the middle of that?
Oh, I don't know if I want to be in the middle of it, but I would say it's important for our audience to really understand what the state's tax structure is currently and what this reform proposal is. I'm sorry, John Bel, I didn't mean to use that word, but I think it's important that everyone really understand what do I pay now? What is the tax structure now? What does this mean for me? What does it mean for business? And then understand, am I really better off in the long run? Am I going to be worse off? Really make a value judgment for themselves so that they can voice their opinion so the legislators know, this is what my constituency thinks about this tax reform proposal.
And from your perspective, Mr. Guidry?
Well, I think it's important to realize that every state is in this discussion. It's an important discussion because if you are in the economic development game, it's important for you as a state to position yourself to be most attractive to people moving into the state and to retain the businesses that you have. So it's good that the citizens of Louisiana are having this discussion.
Well, we're definitely in the middle of it. And Lauren, I think you had a question that you wanted to ask about services, and why don't you pose that to our panelists?
Sure. I'm generally one to support most tax reductions, but as I look at the U.S. Department of Labor, they project that 90% of the jobs created over the next 10 years are going to come in the service economy. And so the notion that taxing that sector that creates most of the jobs will make us more attractive is something I'd like perhaps to get some perspective on, because in general, the more you tax something, the less you get of it, not the more. And so I'd just like someone to reconcile that.
Ms. Barfield, why don't we let you start with that one?
Certainly we're taxing it now. If you look at, businesses are taxed either through corporate income and franchise tax or through personal income tax as it rolls up. What we're talking about is a structure that allows the taxpayer to opportunity to pick and choose when and how they pay taxes, a consumption tax. And there's certainly a lot of support for a consumption tax in terms of growing the economy. And as we look at it, we say, the world's changed a lot in 50 years. It used to be where 2/3 of the sales taxes or commerce out there, your economy was made up of tangible personal property being sold. Today it's 2/3 services. So I think as we look out and we see what the opportunities are and where we can tax people, but tax people fairly and tax people in a way that's conducive to also growing the economy, we think that this is a great alternative, particularly when you look at the total situation of not having personal income taxes, corporate income taxes, having a low property tax position. You step back and it's a very attractive alternative for creating an environment that's bold, that's different, but very conducive to job creation and economic development.
And as we know, services over time have become an expanding part of the economy, probably a large part of your membership, Mr. Guidry. What do you make of the services industry tax that might be coming?
Well, I have to say that business, and it was mentioned earlier in the program, businesses like certainty, and they don't like things rolling out bits and pieces. If they could understand what the tax structure is, the simplification is a very positive attribute that we're looking at. But right now, because of the uncertainty and the complexity of what we're hearing, it's a little unsettling at this point.
Yes, there's certainty, and then there's sort of confident, and then there's sort of lacking total trust.
Well, we're open-minded at this point in time, and we want to give the administration benefit of the doubt. But there's the uncertainty that people are putting their pencil to the paper to ascertain what the numbers are. Once those things are figured out, I think you'll have a lot more comfort in the business community.
Mm-hmm. Jimmy, you had a question that you want to ask about the impact that this tax reform might have on the state and its finances.
Yes, I have some concerns about switching everything, this swap to the sales tax. These concerns involve, first of all, I'm worried about laying a heavier burden on people with less income. I know there's the talk of the rebate, but that seems like to me to be a difficult thing to administer and something that's going to be subject to abuse. Secondly, I have a concern about just the small businesses and just raising the prices, and whether that's going to affect their sales and make it more difficult for small businesses to operate. And thirdly, I have a concern along this line about just our local municipalities, which depend heavily on the sales tax. And if you raise the state tax as well, then they're going to be under more pressure to maintain theirs, much less to try to raise theirs if they need to raise it for their local
and
expenses.
Panelists, you can choose from 3 questions there. and Representative Edwards, which question do you choose?
Well, I'll pick the first one. I share your concerns. I believe at the end of the day, this is a transfer of the tax burden more onto the middle class and poor, more onto the seniors. I think that's the way it's going to end up. In fact, it's so regressive that to roll it out in a way to try to gain approval, we're creating 2 new entitlement programs, one for poor people, one for seniors. And if you have to create entitlement programs in order to sell a new tax structure, it probably isn't something worth doing.
Have you had a sense, Mr. Robinson, about how this might affect businesses in your sphere that you've been dealing with?
A lot of the clients and businesses that I've been dealing with are waiting to see all of the details. There will, of course, be winners and losers. Some businesses will have the benefit of lower income and franchise taxes, but other businesses are looking at the services that they currently utilize and saying, okay, what is the trade-off? How much am I going to end up paying when these services become taxable? So there's a lot of balancing, as I think Mr. Guidry said, they're putting the pencil to the paper and figuring it out.
It might help at this point if we could ask you, Mr. Barfield, to tell us a little bit about the services that are being taxed and not taxed. It might help us understand.
Sure. Well, I think, I would also say that what we encourage all individuals in business to do is put a pencil to it. As Mr. Guidry said, as we look out here, this is a very bold change. And the real question here is to get rid of personal income, and corporate franchise tax, and go to a consumption sales tax type base. Is that worth it? How do you feel about that in terms of what it does to you right now? And we'll be able to show that it'll help drive economic development. We've already seen some reports come out. Report came out today that talks about that. So is that worth it? Is that worth it in terms of the long-term impacts and short-term impacts? And we really encourage businesses, individuals to go out there and do that. And certainly in broadening the service base, we've taken a big step. It's a bold step, and we're looking at services like professional services. We're looking at personal services. We're going into a much broader service base than many states go. Although some states have gone broader.
Right. If people want to see that list, and they're watching the show, and they say they want to see this list, can we get that? And
sure. There's a website at AdvantageLouisiana.com, and we'll have all the information on there.
AdvantageLouisiana.com is where you go for the administration's information on that, and that'll be up there.
That's correct.
That'll be great. Frank, now you work with one of the retirement, with the retirement systems, and looking out for that group. What's your question about how the tax reform will impact them?
Well, Frank Jobert with the Retired State Employees Association. We represent about 40,000 state retirees. I'd like to think we also represent the 60,000 or so teachers, as well as the military and federal retirees who are going to be adversely impacted by the additional sales tax. I know you've proposed a rebate program, the mechanics of which I'm very uncertain. I'd like to hear some specifics on the actual mechanics of how the rebate program will operate, what will be the dollar amount of the rebate, and whether this will be subject to an annual appropriation, or it's just going to be a one-time thing, just debated to go along with the program, and then the program goes away by a simple vote of the legislature in a year or so.
Sure. So from our standpoint, we actually went through this today in the Ways and Means Committee and described the program in general. It's the assistance for assistance for retirees and military personnel. So as we look at this program, it's basically a simple computation. So if you look at the retirement income that's exempt currently under Louisiana, and we also exempt like disability income under Social Security, military income up to $30,000. So we take the existing income tax structure and we compare an individual situation in terms of what is their additional sales tax liability going to be under the increased rate and the broadened base. We use the U.S. Department of Labor's Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Expenditure Survey data to do that. And we compare what that additional burden will be for those individuals against what their benefit of eliminating income tax. So we'll compare that using the federal adjusted gross income. We're going to offer this benefit to retirees on an individual basis with $60,000 or less of income. So we feel like that'll cover 80% of the retirees in the state. That'll also grow with the CPI over time. And at the end of the day, it was never our intent to put a burden on the back of retirees, to put a burden on the back of the poor and low income. It was to do something that would be bold, to again correlate to economic development, to job creation, to a more robust economy, and certainly not do that on the back of the individuals that currently have benefits under our current system.
Thank you very much. And Representative Edwards, I mean, if the system is being set up so that most people are paying less taxes, they're looking out for those low-income people and the retired and the low-income level, those people are being compensated. It's shifting a little more to business. Why isn't that a good plan in your view?
Well, how do you believe that? How can everybody be a winner? That's what they're saying. All income earners across the entire spectrum are going to be winners here.
Every man a king?
Clearly, there's more than $3 billion that has to be made up if we're going to swap one revenue source for another one. And quite frankly, I don't accept that. And if individuals are all winners, then certainly business can't be winners. And I don't know how you improve the business tax climate if you have a $3 billion increase in business taxes. And I know there's some cigarette taxes in there as well, tobacco taxes, and some adjustments on the movie tax credit and enterprise zone tax credit and severance taxes and so forth. But the biggest part of this, if you're to believe what we're being told, would be borne by business. I don't know how you improve the business tax climate if that's what you do.
Yeah. Well, we haven't talked about smokers, but I want to talk about banks just for a minute. Andy, you work for a bank, is that correct? Okay. You had a question about the impact on banks.
Yes. I work for a community bank, and I think community banks may stand to be the biggest losers in the deal. Technically, I only have a small question. Banks pay a shareholder equity tax. Banks don't pay a Louisiana income tax. For my bank, the shareholder equity tax turned into about a 5% tax last year on our income. No mention has been made of eliminating that. We pay, community banks in particular, outsource a lot of services. Data processing maybe being the biggest, and the tax burden will increase greatly. I know you think banks, but the community banks, the small ones, the Tisch Bank, the Bank of Montgomery, the Gippsland banks, these are the ones that support small businesses. The regional banks don't support small businesses. They come here, get deposits, do big deals elsewhere. These are the ones that the economy is built on, that support the activity. Well, is there talk of eliminating the shareholder tax, or will the banks just be double burdened?
At this point, we looked early on at eliminating the shareholder tax. That shareholder tax goes down to local parishes and at that level. And as you know, this plan focuses on the state reform. So at this point, we don't have a solution for eliminating the shareholder tax, and we do know that banks will see some increased burden in terms of what they pay in sales taxes. So that is an issue. We've had some discussions with representatives of the banking industry. I had one today, as a matter of fact, talking about what can be done to handle the impact of that. And frankly, I don't know if there's anything that can be done in the short term. You know, one of the benefits we're asking many businesses to look at is if we do grow the economy, we do make this a better atmosphere for entrepreneurs, for small business people to grow their businesses, more attractive to locate businesses here. And I think banks would be one of the first beneficiaries of that.
Well, let me go to Mr. Guidry and give him a chance to. So do you have many banks who have talked
like Tim said, I also talked with some bankers today, and they acknowledge that the tax will impact them maybe a little bit more, but they're also very concerned about their customers and what the impact will be on the various sectors of their customers out there. And they, again, are waiting for their customers to show them some numbers, and their customers are going to them for advice. And they really don't have the answers that they would like to have to give to their customers so that they can appreciate the whole lay of the land.
John, you want to jump in here?
Sure. I know that some of my small business clients, they really like it because they're profitable. They have income tax both on corporate and personal side, and so they think this is a great idea. So those will be some of the winners in the small business arena. But if we're looking at helping the entrepreneurial community as a whole, a lot of those startups are just by the nature of their business relying heavily on outsourced services, and of course their relationships with their local banks. But the payroll services, of course, advertising because they're trying to grow their business. A lot of those things that are directly tied to their operation. That seems like it contrasts a little bit to us trying to build a package that attracts and supports the entrepreneurial community.
Ms. Robinson, you've worked both in government, Department of Revenue, and now outside with clients, private clients. What do you make of what he's describing?
He's describing the scenario of the winners and losers and the difficult position that the administration is in of trying to balance all of those concerns. I mean, the interest of banks in the fact that they don't pay state income tax. You have insurance companies are in that same position. They pay an insurance premium tax as opposed to a corporate income tax. So you have a lot of different sectors, different constituencies that need to be considered, and so it's a very difficult position to balance everything. And when you are, I think Tim has had the very difficult task for the last few months of trying to balance all of those constituencies and figuring out who will benefit from this, who will have the greatest increase in their tax burden, and really making a value determination that these are the things that are important to grow Louisiana's economy, and these are the tough decisions that have to be made. And I can sympathize with him on having to make those tough decisions, both being in state government and then on the private side of clients who are going to be winners and clients who are going to be losers.
We had, groups of clergy who have come to the Capitol and have expressed their concerns about the people that they feel like they represent, looking out for the interests for, and that this would be harmful to them. And Tim, what do you say to those folks?
Well, certainly, we talked about the fact that while sales taxes can be very regressive, we do have components like food for home consumption, prescription drugs.
In other words, people don't pay a state tax on the food they buy in the grocery store. That's basically what you're saying.
These are exemptions for residential utilities. While there's an excise tax on gas and fuel, we don't double tax it like some states do. So we do have some components that take some of the harshness out of it. And you roll on top of that the Family Assistance Rebate Program that's focused on those poor and low-income families and some lower middle-class families to say any increased burden you have for sales taxes and
have you talked to any of you've talked to the clergy groups?
Actually, I met with a group today.
Great.
So I met with a group today and certainly met with 2 separate groups in the last week. And I think at the end of the day, they certainly want to understand the details, go through the details.
Right.
We're certainly going through the numbers. But that's been a big part of the conversation.
How about you, Representative Edwards? Have you talked to them?
I have. In fact, I met with a group Saturday here in Baton Rouge. And what I would say is it's current law in the state constitution that we're not going to extend the state sales tax to groceries for home consumption, residential utilities, and prescription drugs. But that's true no matter what your income is. That's true for the ultra poor and the ultra rich. So it's not a progressive thing, it's just neutral, and I like the policy, but that's existing law. And you can't make the sales tax, which by its very nature regressive, anything but regressive.
I'm interested in the composition of the panel. I guess I was looking for somebody from consumers who represented the consumer interest. If you look at the state of Louisiana and the increased level of poverty in the state, and I understand the necessity of growing businesses, but who's on watch for the people? If you look at the economic distribution, consumption represents 70% of the economy on any model. And so we have to be on watch for that 70%, and that 70% becomes from people. And so if you began to tax the people, how do you reconcile what services they get? Better education, better law enforcement. So the model seemed to be missing a critical component. Help me reconcile that.
Well, from my standpoint, I'm focused on the revenue side. So as I think was mentioned earlier, it's not just about the revenue. What I like to remind people that whatever our revenue amount is, doesn't it make sense to raise the revenue in a way that's more conducive to economic growth, job creation, and everybody in Louisiana wins? Certainly there are discussions about decreasing the revenue. You have our fiscal hawks, as we like to call them, talking about taking out one-time money. You have many other legislators who would talk about raising revenue. So, and how that revenue is allocated among the different budgets, that's really a different discussion, because at this point, we're just talking about whatever revenue we raise, let's raise it the best way we can.
If you have a tax structure that's fair and transparent, it creates an environment where business can flourish. And if business flourish, they can create more jobs. And when you create jobs, that generates payroll. Payroll goes to buy food, clothing, shelter, transportation, doctor bills. And if you have anything left over at the end of the month, maybe some recreational opportunities. But when you create those jobs, you put people to work. And in my view, that would give them more money in their pockets so that they can go out and have a robust life, as Tim said.
Yeah, and this whole tax swap debate has eaten up a lot of our attention, but there's another parallel reform that they're talking about, and that is this consolidation of collection of tax. And I wonder, Ms. Robinson, you're very familiar with this subject. What basically is the problem as you see it with that, and what's the solution?
Well, from a tax reform standpoint, when you look at the sales tax, for instance, the collection mechanism is that the state collects the state sales tax, and the local sales tax is collected by the 63 parishes that have a sales tax. Cameron Parish does not have a sales tax. And actually it's a few less, because up in the northeast corner of the state there are several parishes that are grouped together under one collector.
And this is unusual. I mean, most states don't have this layout.
We are one of very few states that have this layout. Most states, the taxes are all collected by the state and they're distributed to local governments. The locals impose their own taxes, but the state collects it. So for businesses that come into Louisiana, if you locate in one parish but you make sales to, say, 15 different parishes, you're required to register with all 15 of those parishes, and you are to remit sales tax to those parishes every month. And if you get audited by one or all 15 of the parishes, you may have 15 different audits that take place. So for a lot of businesses, that is very painful to sit through an audit 15 different times, but it's also very burdensome for those different administrators. They have to go out and do the audit. They have to use their own resources. If you imagine employing a staff to, one, administer collection, a staff to administer audits, and a staff to go out and enforce for those taxpayers who are not collecting properly, you have a burden on local government to have to do that.
And you've definitely drilled the problems. Okay, now what about the solutions?
The solution. One of the things that the administration has talked about, they've been working with local government on, is to have a single collection entity within the state. This would be a single collector that's not the state, it's not just local government, it's a combination that involves both local governments coming to the table and state government, and having that single entity collect the sales tax on behalf of all the separate administrators around the state, and also having the money go directly to local government and not having the state receive the money up front and then redistributing it to local government. That's a very important concern for local government, that they still maintain their autonomy and receive the dollars.
Representative Edwards, do you think that's a good reform?
No, I do.
I know you don't like the word reform, but
no,
it's a good
well,
change.
No, that would be a reform, and it ought to be done independent of and in lieu of the larger package that we're
absolutely. There you go. They agree on something. We have it. You saw it here first.
There are several components of the package that make sense, but they make sense independent of the entire package as well, and ought to be seriously considered.
As an advocate for professional educators, and a young person who hopes to start a family in Louisiana, I'm very concerned about how this tax plan, if passed, would impact the ability to fund K through 12 and higher education in our state. As you know, our Constitution has a statutorily dedicated funding mechanism for K through 12 education, part of which is calculated based on a local's ability to fund its own schools. So when voters no longer want to go to the polls and renew these taxes anymore because their sales taxes have gone up, what's going to happen to my kids in their schools?
Yeah, there we go. I mean, that's the risk factor. And why don't we let Mr. Barfield, you start, and anybody else who wants to answer.
Yeah, I think we certainly know that when we delve into the sales tax world, it's a concern for locals, and it's a legitimate concern. But there's a real opportunity here. As we talk about some sort of combined administration, there's a tremendous opportunity for two things: some better efficiencies within the state, as Ms. Robinson just pointed out, but also better coverage. So when you have better audit coverage, you have better collection coverage, you have better collections. And we've seen that in other states that have combined their state and local collections. So, and the second thing I would say is better internet collections. So as Louisiana citizens, we're obligated to pay a use tax when we buy something online or over the telephone or through a catalog. Pay a use tax if the seller didn't collect and remit a tax to Louisiana. So that's a tremendous opportunity. Certainly, I think the ultimate solution for that is a federal solution, but we're also proposing a very robust interim solution, is what I would call it. It's a solution that's going to help people focus on the fact that they do have to pay a use tax, and there's going to be a very strong compliance mechanism there. So what I would say, in cooperation with the locals, we could do something that really creates a lot of better collections and revenue opportunities for the state today under its current system that would make them, it would help minimize the need for additional sales tax collections at the local level. So that's really one of the opportunities here. Instead of just adding more taxes, why don't we do a better job administering the taxes we have? And then we wouldn't necessarily have to go back to our citizens to ask for more money.
I have this sixth sense that Representative Edwards wants to comment on that.
Well, I think funding for a lot of critical governmental services will be impacted by this. And in fact, if the PAR report is correct, we may not be revenue neutral. We may actually be $500 million short, or to $650 million short in the money coming into the state to fund education. But also, if we have the highest sales tax in the nation, which we will, you're going to impact the willingness of locals to renew those sales taxes, which will squeeze those school districts that you're concerned about from the other side as well. And so it could actually be the double whammy.
And I think what PAR is saying was we just need better, more updated numbers, and we're not predicting it's not revenue neutral yet. Well, we shall see. That's what we're trying
but we've needed better numbers in Louisiana for 5 years.
Well, I mean, but think about what you just said. You know, we need better numbers. We're having these constant shortages. I mean, why isn't it time to think about change? Now, this is what's interesting about this proposal. It's supposed to be revenue neutral, but everybody wants to see a little more revenue, but they don't want it. They don't want to raise taxes. So, Mr. Barfield, how would you address that point?
Because I think that first of all, revenue in terms of the type of revenue is very important to look at. So sales taxes are a very stable type of revenue, and and particularly when you propose broadening the base to other services, you really cover the state in terms of industry sectors. You have sort of built-in diversification among your tax base. So I think that's very important to note that when some of our current income tax grows very quickly when the economy's good, but it also collapses very quickly when the economy turns south. Sales tax base would be much more stable. And I think if you went and looked at the charts and you said, well, you put this in place 5 years ago, you would not have had quite the revenue decrease. It would have certainly declined, but over the scope of it. So I think that's the health of the revenue you're getting, the predictability. So I think what you're pointing to, and I think what Representative Edwards is pointing to, is that predicting revenue is very difficult in this state. It's difficult because we have a myriad of exemptions. It's difficult because we have a myriad of tax types. A sales tax of this type would, I think, add in tremendous improvements to the predictability of our revenue stream.
Okay. Well, Vanita, you had a question that I think the panel wanted to hear.
Yes. If there is, if it's not revenue neutral, and if we do have that shortfall, are you going to be cutting education and healthcare again, or raise property taxes?
And just so you know, he's not in charge of the spending side. He's in charge of the collecting side.
But I would still like to know what happens.
He's in charge of the spending side.
We don't have a state property tax, I should say, so that will not be part of the deal. Obviously, if we run short of revenue, we're required to have a balanced budget, and we will continue to cut. One of the things that I'm not sure will be in the proposal or not would be an automatic increase in the sales tax rate if in fact it proves not to be revenue neutral. That was a component that was discussed earlier. I don't know that they've gotten that far in the actual legislation, and I'm not sure whether Tim is prepared to address that tonight, but there could be an increase in the sales tax beyond the 1.88% or the 5.88% on services if in fact it were not revenue neutral.
Okay, we're running short in time, but I want you, Ms. Robinson, Mr. Guidry, to give one last shot at some final points.
Oh, I get to go first. Well, I think that Tim's going to have the very difficult question of what happens if it's not revenue neutral. Fortunately, I don't have to make that decision anymore, but I think that is one of the things that's very important for the audience to keep in mind. What does this mean? What's the bottom line? And what happens to state services if, in fact, we're not revenue neutral?
Mr. Guidry.
Well, it's classic Chamber of Commerce work to help the local governments create a sense of place. And to have a great sense of place, you need good fire department services, police department services, roads, and those types of things. And the local government does depend on the local sales tax. So that is a concern for chambers of commerce that are trying to create a wonderful place to live and a place to work and grow a family. So that is one of the concerns. But we have an open mind in the business community, and we'd like to see the numbers and see where it goes.
Great. And Mr. Barfield, we're going to let you leave us with the last thought.
Well, first of all, this will be revenue neutral. So the bill we put together, we've committed all along to be revenue neutral. We've used 2001 data because that's the most accurate data set we have. So the exercise now has been to walk it forward in a way that the Legislative Fiscal Office and the REC and all those will respect that exercise. So we're at the final stages of doing that. And at the end of the day, this is a tremendous opportunity for Louisiana. We have a tremendous opportunity, and we're having the right conversation. So is it worth changing our tax system dramatically, not only to simplify our tax system, but have a tax system that's going to encourage more economic development and encourage more job creation? That is a simple question, and I think this conversation, this debate has been teed up well, and I look forward to working with the legislature and working with our stakeholder groups to come to a better resolution than we have today.
Okay, and we'll have resources on the LPB website, and also, again, your website was, what was it?
AdvantageLouisiana.com.
Louisiana, and that'll have a lot of the government documents on there that we'll need, right. And the stage is set. Well, that brings us to the end of this section of our panel. We'd like to thank our panelists, Mr. Barfield, Mr. Representative Edwards, Ms. Robinson, and Mr. Guidry, and thanks to our audience for doing such a great job today. A great discussion, and here we go. We've got a lot more. That's all. We'll be back in just a few moments with some closing comments.
Well, Robert, that's all the time we have for this conversation, but fundamentally in Louisiana, we know it's the old Huey Long saying, don't tax you, don't tax me, what?
Tax the guy behind the tree, right?
But at some point there are some taxes.
We could just figure out who that guy is.
Well,
okay.
Indeed, we're out of time for this edition of Louisiana Public Square, but we encourage you to visit our website at lpb.org/public square. While you're there, take this month's survey, view extended interview clips, and comment on tonight's show. We'd love to hear from you, like we did last month following preventable HIV/AIDS in Louisiana. Carol writes, "Thank you so very much for confronting the issue of HIV and AIDS in Louisiana. It is past time for this epidemic to be squarely faced and discussed in public forums." And Jerry writes, "I like the fact that you stressed it's not just a gay man's issue. I wish to be part of the solution. How can I be of service?" Well, thanks to everyone for their comments, and for Jerry and anyone else who wants to help, try contacting one of the organizations listed under the additional resources on last month's website.
Well, 3 years after the BP oil spill, a civil trial is taking place to determine liability. 80% of penalties paid will go towards Gulf Coast restoration. But will it be money well spent? A federal agency recently predicted Louisiana's southeastern coast will be under 4 feet of water by the end of the century. Well, join Louisiana Public Square next month as it explores how the state is addressing sea level rise, subsidence, hurricanes, and oil spills on coastal concerns, BP, and beyond.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
For a copy of this program, call 1-800-973-7246 or go online to www.lpb.org.
Support for this program is provided by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting.